Hey, I'm Sam. Welcome to Brickwall Pictures. This Halloween season, I want to take a look at jump scares, a subject that has caused a lot of ire and outrage within the horror community, and for good reason. For a far too long stretch of horror cinema, especially throughout the 90s and 2000s, jump scares were the dominant mode of scare, with mainstream US horror offerings seemingly forgetting how to construct any sense of atmosphere or tension or provide any other type of scare. I guess besides buckets of gore in the torture porn genre, but that's a subject for another video. Before we get too deep, if you're looking for a new book to read this spooky season, you can grab yourself a copy of my horror novel, South of the Mason-Dixon. The link is down in the description. You can grab yourself a paperback copy, or it's also available on Kindle and e-readers and as an audiobook. And, just to be clear, it's not like this is some kind of money thing. I don't really make a lot of money off of this book or anything. I just want people to experience the story. If you have Kindle Unlimited, you can read the ebook version for free. And if you haven't already used your Audible free trial, you can even listen to the audiobook version for free that way. It's interesting to note that jump scares aren't even a possibility in book form, since they rely so heavily on the jolt of surprise that you get from a loud sound happening. How's that for a segue? Luckily, the outcry against jump scares seemed to eventually get through as talented filmmakers began bucking the trend and fighting to keep their horror films free of needless quiet then bang, rinse and repeat scares. Sort of like how the action genre was plagued by shaky cam and quick cut editing after the popularity of the Bourne sequels, and it took all the way until John Wick's breakthrough success to usher back in an age of clarity in shootouts and fight scenes. There were less definitive watershed moments for the boom of jump scares and their slow decline. And make no mistake, jump scares are far from gone. They are ever present in normie horror, like the whole Insidious, Conjuring universes, and those dime a dozen studio horror flicks that show up around Halloween, make a shit ton of money, and then you never hear about them or ever think about them ever again. The general sentiment against jump scares is quite negative. I think it's safe to say that the majority of real horror fans hate jump scares, and I would consider myself in that camp. But if that's true, why are jump scares so prevalent? There's a clear answer to that, which I'll get to in a moment, but first I think it behooves us to set a definition for jump scare so that we're all on the exact same page. After all, it's not like it's some official regulated term that has only one single concrete definition. I would think this would be pretty obvious, a kind of you know it when you see it sort of thing. But you can never underestimate how wrong people can be and how assertively they'll scream their incorrect understandings of the world at other people. Every once in a while, I hear random people referring to any and all scary or frightening moments as jump scares, which just really pains me. It's boiling a huge swath of filmmaking techniques and storytelling elements down to just their cheapest and easiest component. Look no further than those endless top 10 jump scare videos with millions of views to find people who have no idea what a jump scare is. I wonder what number one is. Oh, it's Hereditary, a film that famously avoided jump scares, and that was one of the many reasons why so many horror fans loved it. Well, okay, what scene are they saying is a jump scare? How exactly is that a jump scare? Answer, it isn't. Like, not at all. It's a scary scene. Where's the jump? And there's the key. The jump is really the important part of the term jump scare. The jump is that little jump you're supposed to do in your seat when a jump scare happens. But therein lies the problem. When you are genuinely scared, frightened, creeped out, your autonomic response is not a little jolt in your seat. That's not being scared. That's being startled. They ought to call them jump startles, but okay, fine, that doesn't exactly roll off the tongue. Another great scare moment that I often see erroneously called a jump scare can be found in Lake Mungo. The film has one huge scare moment. You know exactly what I'm talking about if you've seen the film. And if you haven't, I'm not going to spoil it. One, because it's a great horror film that you should check out, and two, because it doesn't work at all without the context of the full film surrounding it. So please resist the temptation to type in Lake Mungo scary scene and watch it in isolation. But here's the thing, it isn't anywhere near being a jump scare. There's no loud bang, there's nothing jumping quickly into frame. Instead, it's a slow, creepy moment that is deeply upsetting and likely to give you chills. The fact that so many people call it a jump scare seems to either be an extension of people conflating being startled with being scared, or just not knowing what a jump scare is, because that ain't it. Beyond a fundamental misunderstanding of the difference between scaring and startling, the other big issue with jump scares is just how formulaic they often are. Everyone knows the formula by pattern recognition alone, even if you never stop to think about it. You drop out the music and the ambience, you go quiet. Then there's a loud bang and the music or sound effects paired with someone or something reaching into frame, jumping into frame, popping into frame, breaking through something into frame. You get the idea. From here, jump scares can be sorted into two buckets, consequential and inconsequential, the latter of which we can also call red herring jump scares. Just as with most facets of storytelling, things that are consequential always matter more than things that are inconsequential. Yeah, I know that's a super high-level writing concept. Things that matter are better than things that are pointless. Try and wrap your head around that one. When applied to jump scares, consequential means that whatever jumps out and scares the protagonist is a legitimate danger to them. AKA, the jump scare isn't just an excuse to startle the audience and then move on. The jump scare itself introduces consequences. If a jump scare introduces or reintroduces a threat that then sticks around and poses genuine danger, the jump scare stops feeling so cheap and manipulative. On the other hand, the inconsequential jump scare is the much worse of the two types and is by far the more common variety. If you watch as many horror films as me, then you have seen hundreds and hundreds of instances of the same recycled inconsequential jump scares over and over again. How many times have you seen a hand reach out and grab someone's shoulder from behind, and then they spin around and realize it's just their friend weirdly grabbing them in the dark instead of getting their attention in literally any other way? Countless times, surely.
Shh, hang on a second.
How about that old chestnut where a cat jumps out and startles the characters, and it doesn't matter in the slightest? They even made fun of this stupid trope on one of the Community Halloween specials years ago.
What is up with that cat?
Is someone throwing it?
Keep moving.
And no, it doesn't make the jump scare any less cheap and lazy to switch up the animal. It doesn't matter if it's a bird flapping by or a raccoon knocking over some trash cans. It's still the same manipulative, quiet then bang formula with no stakes or consequences or even any relevance to the plot. When people say they hate jump scares, I think they're often referring specifically to the second category of jump scare, even if they don't know it. This false scare bucket is what I really hate to see in horror films personally. Though it has to be noted that both types can and often are done extremely poorly. The thing is, it's possible to do a consequential jump scare well, whereas an inconsequential jump scare is doomed by design. Okay, so now that we know all the ins and outs of what jump scares are, how they work, and why they don't work, let's figure out why they're so common anyway, especially the shitty, inconsequential kind of jump scare. These red herring scares have been around for so long and are so egregiously shameless that they've already been getting parodied for years, like when Cabin in the Woods turned its title card into a jump scare as a joke.
So you want to come over Monday night? I'm going to pick up some power drills, liberate my cabinets. Are you even listening to me?
Or when Scream 5, the one without a number in the title because they're fucking stupid, that one. When that one built the whole scene around setting up quiet then bang jump scare moments, but not giving the bang. By the way, that was one of the only scenes that worked for me in that movie, and even then they still wussed out at the end of the sequence and still did a loud-ass jump scare at the end of it. So why are jump scares still so prevalent even though everyone seems to hate them? Well, the truth is that everyone doesn't hate them. In fact, lots of normies like jump scares. It's partially a lowest common denominator thing. You can find plenty of user reviews and even a few critic reviews admonishing good horror films for not having jump scares, or even for not having enough jump scares, as if there's some quota of quiet then bang red herring startles that a horror film needs to hit to give them their money's worth. Hardcore horror fans and what I tend to call pedestrian horror fans are often divided on this topic. The pedestrian horror fans like jump scares. They expect them and even demand them out of their horror films. I'm not saying this in any kind of elitist way. The point I'm making is that different camps of people go into horror movies looking for different things. And as evidenced by the films that often dominate the box office, the majority of money-spending audiences just want mainstream commercialized junk food cinema. And that's what jump scares are to the world of horror. A lot of people really do conflate being startled with being scared. It gets the heart rate up, and it can be enough to convince someone who watches one horror movie a year on Halloween that they got their spooky fix for the holiday, like going through a haunted house. Now, are jump scares always bad? Well, no. Are they usually bad? Sure, but always? Not quite. I would argue that the red herring jump scare variety is always bad. But consequential jump scares can be fine or even great when executed properly, but it's so easy to execute them improperly. I can hardly believe I'm about to sing the praises of a bunch of jump scares, but that's what's happening. And I'll also provide some actionable ways to make jump scares better. Here's an easy way to improve consequential jump scares. Just take out the external bang, that loud sound that blares over the soundtrack. Let the scare stand on its own merits. If you need to wail on the piano keys to startle the audience and make a moment faux scary, then maybe you should try addressing the root issue and make the actual moment scarier. Just removing that obvious startle cue is enough to improve the moment right off the bat.
We'll do you last.
We can look to The Descent for a positive example of this. This jump scare from early on in the film works for a couple of key reasons, one of which being that the scare moment is not accompanied by a manipulative bang on the keyboard. Even though this is an indisputable jump scare moment, and it even falls into the red herring category, with the protagonist waking up unscathed afterward, it works anyway. So let's figure out why. First, it still follows the quiet then bang formula with something flying into frame, but the bang is entirely in universe. There's shattering glass and a gasp as she wakes up. You already have the loud, startling sound motivated by the events and actions of the film. You don't need a giant spike on the soundtrack on top of that. This is a lesson that all horror filmmakers should take note of. It's a super easy way to elevate any jump scare. Make the bang diegetic. The scare will instantly feel more earned and less manipulative. Second, even though this jump scare falls into the often deplorable red herring bucket, it still works because it's thoroughly grounded in the protagonist's unique POV and the themes of the film. Sure, she's physically unscathed by this nightmare, but she's mentally scathed, and her mental state is a key component of the overall film. It isn't just any random old object crashing through the window. It's one of the same poles that impaled her husband and daughter in the car crash that opened the film, the event that destroyed her life and has left her traumatized ever since. This isn't just, oh, let's throw a nightmare jump scare in there to keep the audience awake, like so many jump scares are used in inferior movies. Instead, it's, let's create a frightening manifestation of the trauma that haunts our main character and foreshadows both the personal horrors that await her underground and her character arc. Even David Lynch has done what you could technically call jump scares. This is another moment like Lake Mungo that I won't spoil, so the footage you're seeing is from earlier parts of the film. Not only does it come toward the end of the movie, but again, it doesn't work out of context, which is really telling about the best scare scenes, because let's keep in mind, any shitty red herring jump scare works exactly the same whether in context or out of context. The same cannot be said of the jump scares that are actually good. Just go watch Inland Empire, goddammit, because it is front to back phenomenal. You just have to overlook the crappy early digital visual quality and you'll find one of Lynch's many masterpieces. It's a little reductive to call the scare I'm talking about a jump scare, honestly, but it does hit all the criteria. It just doesn't feel anything like those rote jump scares we're so numb to, because this time it's being executed by a master of the craft. Inland Empire spends almost 3 hours building up to this jump scare, and when it hits, it's one of the most terrifying things you will ever see. Again, if you've seen the film, you know exactly the moment I'm talking about. Watch it late at night and it will give you chills and maybe even lead you into a nightmare, which you never get from a standard disposable jump scare. This moment has so much build-up and so much context surrounding it, and so many disturbing, uncanny, impossible implications, all through the wholly unique lens of the one and only David Lynch, presenting something you can't find anywhere else. People also like to call this scene from Mulholland Drive a jump scare too, and I guess it kind of is, honestly, but I really think it's its own animal. Whatever it is, it's perfect. Let's jump to an example that you may have actually already seen out of context. The hospital scene from The Exorcist III is plastered all over the place without context, and oftentimes without even indicating that it's from The Exorcist III. This scare pops up in so many scariest movie moments lists and whatnot. Far more people have seen this one scene in isolation than have seen all of The Exorcist III, which is a damn shame for a couple of reasons. First, because it's an excellent film overall. I have a video on my Deserves More Respect series breaking it down that you can check out for more detail. And two, because just like Inland Empire and Lake Mungo and really all the best jump scares, it relies on the context of the film that surrounds it. Try saying that the context is important for any of the thousands of scenes where a cat jumps out and startles the main character. You can't do it. If you've seen The Exorcist III jump scare out of context, then the video you saw might have been 30 seconds long, maybe a minute long. But it's important to know that the individual scene that this jump scare takes place within lingers in this hospital hallway with nothing happening for 4 minutes and 20 seconds before the scare happens. And it's tense as fuck the entire time. One of the masterful little flourishes that William Peter Blatty does in the director's chair is to hang back in this wide shot of the hallway for so long, but also to cut away from it a couple of times. As horror fans, anyone watching this scene knows that a scare is happening because the plot is put on hold, but Blatty makes you wait and wait and wait for it on the edge of your seat. It's kind of like the old Hitchcock bomb under the table quote.
4 people are sitting around a table, talking about baseball, whatever you like. 5 minutes of it, very dull. Suddenly, a bomb goes off, blows the people to smithereens. What do the audience have? 10 seconds of shock. Now take the same scene and tell the audience there is a bomb under that table and will go off in 5 minutes. Well, the whole emotion of the audience is totally different because you've given them that information that in 5 minutes' time that bomb will go off. Now the conversation about baseball becomes very vital because they're saying to you, don't be ridiculous, stop talking about baseball, there's a bomb under there. You've got the audience working.
Except Blatty withholds more information. We don't know there's a bomb under the table, but we know something is under there. The best part is that even after rewatching the film several times, it's still hard to know exactly when the scare is coming, meaning it isn't predictable like jump scares often are. This wide shot screams that something is going to pop out from somewhere, but Blatty fills the frame with so many places for our eyes to bounce between. And just when we think he couldn't drag the tension out any longer, he cuts from the wide shot into other coverage without any scare happening. Then we're back to the wide shot and still waiting. This is not a case of dropping the audio and going all quiet for a few seconds so the bang is startling. It's a similar effect, but on a much protracted scale that makes the tactic genuinely effective. The construction of this scare is so masterful, and it could honestly be seen as the template that shitty horror movies bastardized and truncated with their ineffective jump scares. After all, it does predate the deluge of cheapo jump scares that would follow just a few years later. For another tactic to make jump scares stronger, we can actually look to the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 of all films, which of course isn't anywhere near the quality of the original film, but it's a pretty good time in its own right. Here's a jump scare from early on in the film that I love.
Far out fan! What's in here?
Record vault.
Oh, where you keep the golden oldies and maybe the new music's in
Here's my next tip to make a good, consequential jump scare. Don't telegraph it. That should be obvious, but the vast majority of jump scares do telegraph that it's coming. And that can be effective for creating tension followed by a release when done right, like in The Exorcist III as we just discussed. Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2 not only avoids telegraphing the jump scare, it completely misdirects your attention with one creepy character so that the emergence of Leatherface comes as a genuine shock. And it's perfectly orchestrated on camera, with the center framing of the darkness, the timing of the light switch. It's a beautifully orchestrated scare. While red herring jump scares are awful, Tobe Hooper uses a red herring correctly to distract from the impending consequential jump scare instead of telegraphing it. There's no quiet then bang. Instead, it's distraction then... And speaking of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 2, let's go back to the first Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the film that I named the single best horror film ever made when I counted down my top 100 horror films, which you can find a link to in the description if you're looking for some recommendations for this Halloween season. Here's a scene that could be a jump scare, but is executed with such restraint and realism that it defies that categorization. This is the first kill of the movie, and it's also the first time we've seen Leatherface. He comes out of nowhere and claims his first victim within 3 seconds of screen time. That's how you introduce a fucking villain. I cannot gush enough about how this scene is shot and edited. It is so brilliant that the first shot that introduces Leatherface is a static wide shot where he is obscured by both the doorway and the victim in front of him. Leatherface is only visible for about 11 frames in this first shot. Not 11 seconds, 11 frames. Less than half a second. You aren't given the time to process what you're seeing. Leatherface has such a creepy and distinctive design, but you don't get to sit back and take that in. No, because he kills so fast that his victim can't process what he's seeing either. Just consider the fact that the only time the camera moves in close to Leatherface here is in this point of view shot looking up at him. And again, the shot is only about 1 second long. The rest of the scene plays out from that wide shot down the hall, or while keeping Leatherface out of frame and focusing only on the victim. This level of restraint works wonders and makes the kill infinitely more terrifying than it would have been if it was executed differently. I mean, how many other horror films have you seen where someone is killed by a blow to the head from a hammer? Loads of them. How many of them made the kill more frightening than this? 0. And that sense of restraint extends to the sound design. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre uses an uncomfortably raw, gritty style that almost has a documentary feel to it at times. So it's perfectly fitting that there is no loud bang on the soundtrack when Leatherface emerges. In fact, there's no soundtrack at all.
Hello?
just the disturbing, squealing pig noises Leatherface makes, and the disturbing sounds of his victim convulsing and thrashing on the ground after taking a blow to the head. You can see why it's my top horror film of all time. I could go on and on like this about every single scene in the film. But instead, here's how the remake executed the same kill. Needless to say, much, much worse in all regards. I'm not even going to get into how ugly the color grading is and whatnot, and I skipped right past the fact that when Leatherface passes through frame earlier as a shadow, they play a pointlessly loud jump scare sound. Forget all that. Let's just focus on the mechanics of how this kill scene is executed by focusing on the changes. First off, there are other people in the building with the victim this time, including the main protagonist of the movie, who's like right in the next room over, which is just way less frightening right off the bat than the original, where the main character is off on his own far away from his friends. Second, they had Leatherface attack from behind in this one, which is immediately far less frightening because we're no longer seeing him through the eyes of the victim. They went through the trouble of making a new excuse for him to be down on the floor looking up by picking up a bracelet instead of tripping, but they somehow missed the fact that the point of having him hit the floor was so that we could be in his point of view as we look up and take in our first horrifying glimpse of Leatherface. Instead, the victim doesn't even see it coming and doesn't get a chance to be afraid, and since audiences are empathy machines, it's better for our characters to be afraid rather than caught off guard so that their emotion informs our own. And of course, they added in the jump scare sound fantasy attacks. So dumb. By the way, they also, in this movie, have the classic, a possum jumps out with a loud bang and everyone screams. And of course, following up the jump scare sound, the music kicks on and it's awful. It's like exciting action music. Why is that the tone you're going for here? Also, they skipped the whole thrashing on the ground thing, which is one of the most disturbing details from the original. Actually, I think maybe they're trying to have him thrash around a little, but it's while he's being dragged away by Leatherface, so you can't really tell, and it doesn't land. They also make Leatherface drag the guy way farther instead of just the sobering abruptness of the metal shutter door slamming immediately. And it's obviously less effective to drag him farther. That's without even getting into how they changed that iconic and unsettling interior into the most cliched horror setting imaginable. Like, oh, the walls are dirty now. That's better than the bright red wall covered in animal skulls at the end of the hallway the character was approaching this whole scene. By the way, just read all the YouTube comments from people saying that the remake did this scene so much better than the original if you want to lose a little faith in humanity. And what? People are even saying that the music sounds like it belongs in the original? You're talking about this shitty generic music that doesn't fit the tone, and you're talking about the original that didn't use any music at all in this scene? What fucking planet are you living on? Okay, I gotta stop. I'm just ranting now. Let's end it there. This video's long enough. We covered a whole lot of awful jump scares, but also a couple really great ones, and some easy guidelines for how to make consequential jump scares better. Jump scares often suck, but not always. Check out my Top 100 Horror Films video for some recommendations to check out, and any past year's Macabre Month of Horror playlists. And once again, you can pick yourself up a copy of my horror novel, South of the Mason-Dixon, if you want to experience my own take on the genre firsthand.